Hi, today we're going to be talking about the WorldCom scandal. We'll be hitting three major points: the industry analysis, the rise and fall of WorldCom, and then we'll be looking at the financial statements and what went wrong. So what exactly is WorldCom?
WorldCom is the second largest long-distance phone company in the telecommunication industry. And what exactly is the telecommunication industry?
Excellent question. The telecommunications industry is in the information and communication sector. The information and communication sector is within the Mobile Communications Society. This is one of the fastest growing sectors in the 1980s.
Up until 1984, ACCT had control over the nation's local phone networks. However, on January 1984, the system broke apart. This helped upstart fiber optic long-distance firms and made long-distance calling become a lot cheaper.
The buyer power was set at high because buyers in the telecom industry landed two categories: individual and enterprise customers. There were lots of telecom providers in the market, and cheaper prices give buyers options.
The supplier power was low because bargaining power for suppliers had increased, so this led to decrease in supplier power and price wars between communication carriers.
The threat of substitutes was set at moderate. Internet communication is a substitute which gives flat and fixed rate revenues.
The threat of entry was low because of governmental and legal barriers, and gaining access to the optical fiber network is not easy.
The main competitive advantage was WorldCom's rapid growth. Within 6 years, they had capped at 65 mergers, with MCI being the biggest, totaling in value of $37 million.
Following the MCI merge in 1997, WorldCom now handled internet and communications data. 50% of the U.S. internet traffic and 50% of emails worldwide were handled by WorldCom, and they grew to be the second largest long-distance carrier.
In 1983, at a diner in small-town Mississippi, local businessmen meet over coffee and plan to seize the opportunity of the broken monopoly. They wanted to convince people that they could do the same thing as ACCT for less money. Bernie Ebbers was one of the 7 investors who helped create the long-distance discount service. Bernie had a reputation for major cost control. They were the new kids on the block with their sights set high.
Bernie Ebbers, also known as the Telecom Cowboy, was the CEO and chairman of WorldCom. He had his undergrad degree in physical education, and although he might not have known a ton about the financial regulations, he just had a knack for managing and getting people to follow and believe what he believed. He was constantly doing everything he could to make the financial statements look better and make the company money and save the company money in whatever way possible, even if that meant charging his employees money for coffee. And although he was constantly trying to save money for the company, when it came to himself, he spent very lavishly, and we'll talk about that later on. Hey, boss. No more free coffee.
In Bernie's personal life, he was a spendthrift. He loved buying things, and he loved buying things with other people's money. Bernie was pulling in $36 million a year from stock options and was accused of suspicious consumption. He bought a golf course.
He bought a crawfish farm.
I bought a yacht company.
He bought the largest privately owned ranch in Canada.
I even bought a yacht you could steer from the hot tub.
He bought a $5 million lodge in Mississippi.
I named my yacht Acquisition.
The money to buy all of this comes from personal loans underwritten by J.P. Morgan and Citigroup. The loans totaling $408 million, all secured by WorldCom stock. By early 2000, the outlook for the long-distance business is stormy. There was just too much competition. The banks tap on Bernie's shoulder and ask for their money back. Bernie was in trouble, and he may have to sell some of his stock. A margin call happened. When the CEO begins to sell his stock, investors get nervous, because they take this as a sign that the CEO thinks the future is poor. In response, the WorldCom board of directors wanted to avoid a fire sale of stock, so they loaned Ebbers $408 million. This move attracted the attention of the SEC, who wants to know more about the bailout.
By the end of 2000, the stock tumbled 70% to $17 a share, but Bernie Ebbers continued to be a cheerleader for WorldCom.
What do you say to your investors who bought your stock at $62 a share and now it's at $17 per share?
I'd buy. No better time to buy. If I wouldn't have spent all my money on yachts, I'd be buying right now too.
Now I'll talk about the fraud triangle based on Bernie. Overall, there was a bad tone at the top. Company structure did not have a culture which promoted ethical and proper behavior. Example would be Sullivan just couldn't say no to Ebers because of loyalty. Another opportunity came from lack of internal controls since most of the senior officers worked together on the fraud. Ebers had his nose in everyone's business because of no segregation of duties. Eber was seen as a figure of guidance at WorldCom, and there was high pressure to meet Wall Street expectations for him. Ebers had a very lavish lifestyle, which led him to take out high amounts of loans. These loans were backed by Ebers' WorldCom stocks. This meant the stock prices had to stay high, otherwise he was going to get a margin call. This also happened in the early 2000s during the tech bubble crash, which meant a lot of economical and market pressure on the CEO of WorldCom. Eber justified his actions because company needed to report increased earnings so stock prices can remain high. He also had to upkeep his personal reputation because he had a big ego. Eber believed that it would be a one-time thing and the economy will eventually get better.
Scott Sullivan was CFO for WorldCom. Bernie pressured Sullivan. Sullivan said, quote, "Bernie pressured me into making the adjustments. You know how intimidating Bernie can be." When asked by a prosecutor whether or not Bernie had threatened to fire him, Sullivan said Bernie sometimes said, "We'll get a new CFO," whenever they disagreed. Sullivan told the jury, "He said it in a joking way, but I didn't take it as a joke." In terms of opportunity, the company culture did not support ethical behavior. There was a negative tone at the top. Efforts to establish a code of conduct were received by Bernie's disapproval. Ebers described the code as a colossal waste of time, and as a result there was no training on fraud or ethics. Rewards were given to employees who were loyal to top management. This taught employees to never question authority. There was also no way for employees to express concerns about company policy and behavior. Sullivan rationalized his actions by saying it was temporary. He said, quote, "I knew it was against the law, but I thought we'd make it through."
Revenue growth slowed and the stock prices began falling. 1999 was a bad time for all companies in the telecommunications industry. WorldCom's expenses as a percentage of its total revenues increased because the growth rates of its earnings dropped. This also meant WorldCom's earnings might not meet Wall Street analysts' expectations. WorldCom, however, was used to being the best and wanted to keep it that way. In an effort to increase revenue, WorldCom reduced the amount of money it held in reserve by $2.8 billion and moved this money into the revenue line of its financial statements. This, however, did not produce the boost in earnings that Ebers wanted. In 2000, WorldCom began classifying operating expenses as long-term capital investments. Hiding these expenses in this way gave them another $3.85 billion. These newly classified assets were expenses that WorldCom paid to lease phone networks from other companies to access their networks. They also added a journal entry for $500 million in computer expenses, but supporting documents for the expenses were never found. These changes turned WorldCom's losses into profits, valuing $1.38 billion in 2001. It also made WorldCom's assets appear more valuable.
The fraud was actually discovered internally. Cynthia, vice president of internal audit, was the whistleblower in this situation. She began to question how WorldCom was doing so much better compared to the peers in the industry, and just had questions about how the financial statements were coming together and certain things that her staff was finding that led to questions. And whenever she would question Scott Sullivan, the CFO, he became very defensive about everything that was going on and talked to her about possibly taking away some of the bonuses of the staff if they kept looking into things. And that just rubbed her the wrong way. And then eventually, once Bernie Ebers got wind of it, he just acted completely oblivious to the fact that anything was going on. So a lot of those discoveries that she made led to more investigation from the SEC.
On March 15, 2005, the jury made a decision that Bernie was guilty for conspiracy and securities fraud. Ebers was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, which is one of the longest sentences for white-collar crimes in U.S. history. Bernie was in his 60s at the time, which is basically a life sentence.
On one hand, it's tragic. You have this man that was once on top of the world, and now he's going to be dying in prison. But on the other hand, my sympathies lie with the victims. Just because he wore a white suit to work doesn't mean that this should be treated more gingerly.
He stole my money.